Good morning, Charlotte.
Morning, Nina.
How are you?
I'm all right. I'm up. I've got a coffee. In fact, I've got the whole pot of coffee.
The whole pot.
Yeah, I brought it up.
Steadily working your way through the whole pot.
Yeah.
What are you up to at the minute? Have you got anything interesting on?
I have. I've got a nice little headstone. Well, when I say, I mean, it's sad, but I've got a little headstone that I'm enjoying doing the carving on. Nice piece of Portland. And I've got some nice jobs. I've got another sundial.
Nice.
Yeah,
Very nice.
quite a lot of hand sawing though through some of the stone.
Oh, why hand sawing, not grinding?
Because I need to cut the stone up and it's soft enough to saw by hand, and it's
Okay.
easier than hauling it in the car and taking it to somebody with a big wheel. So
Yes.
I'm gonna say to myself, a bit like little Lord Fauntleroy,
What?
exercise is beneficial.
Swap arms. That's what I always think. Swap arms
Yeah,
while you're doing it. It's a
yeah.
dance. I love cutting stone up by hand.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I love the
I know
rocking
somebody
backwards
that
and
needs some
forwards.
stone cutting by hand.
Oh, really? Oh, maybe. When I come and see you next week, you're going to have going, are you cold? I've turned the heating off. Why don't you do some sawing? Oh, all right, then, fine.
Yeah.
I'm in the final year of my part-time MA. So I've got a 2-week hiatus before the thing starts. So I've been doing a bit of that, which is a bit odd when you're late 50s studying for a higher educational qualification. Very odd.
I think it's odd. I think many of us have a desire for self-improvement and learning all through our lives.
Yeah. I don't mean it's odd that I should do it. It's just an odd that you have to reboot your brain.
Okay.
It's at the minute it's still not a natural thing to do, is to spend time on things that aren't necessarily for commission. It's still not natural to me yet.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that will change. Yeah, that's been interesting. But we are here primarily to introduce our next guest, aren't we?
Great inspiration.
Yes. So this is an interview with Rosie Musgrave, a sculptor from the Bristol area. And both Charlotte and I were really excited that she agreed to come on. So here's Rosie talking about her life and her experience. And just a nod to the interview, Rosie has had a really long and varied journey in stone. And Charlotte and I have deliberately kind of removed ourselves from the interview, really, haven't we? We've let Rosie talk about her life because there was a lot to get through in the hour. And just listen and just take on board the experience and the breadth that this woman has gone through. And I really hope you enjoy it.
Yeah.
Today we've got a wonderful guest, Rosie Musgrave. Now, I know Rosie mainly through social media. We've never met in person, but I was really blown away by her work and her beautiful printmaking and the scale of the work and the beauty of the geometric forms, etc. So I'm really, really grateful and excited that you've agreed to come on today, Rosie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. It's really nice to see both of you, even if it's only on Zoom. And I was surprised and really touched that you've asked me, because I've come to stone carving in a really roundabout way. And I didn't really start seriously because I didn't have a studio until I was about 48. So I had a lot of different lives before I started to really seriously carve. But those lives have really influenced my work. So perhaps I ought to just quickly run through what I did before I managed to land, really.
That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. So as a child, I loved art, but I was nothing exceptional at all. And my parents were really aware of beauty, and they took us children to see beautiful things. And my father was really the huge influence for me in working with stone, because he had a passion for mountains and for rock climbing. So most of our childhood family holidays were amongst mountains. And so I just messed around with rocks. Now, with the stones in my pocket, the smell of stone and the feel of stone and the warmth of the sun that's sunk into the stone, it's all very much part of me. But also there was a very strong influence that we were expected to offer service, public service, really. So when I left school, I went straight into training in a London hospital. I trained as a physio. And 3/4 of the way through, I had the wisdom to realize I was going in the wrong direction for myself, and I left. And I did all sorts of things in London, and I think I was a bit lost, really. One of the jobs I had was working in what was then called the social care unit underneath St. Martin in the Fields in Trafalgar Square. And for some unknown random, I feel somebody's been tugging at me all my life, really. And for a random reason, I went and did an evening class in clay modeling. And that was it. I absolutely loved it. And the seed was sown, really. And after that, I worked for some sculptors for a very short time and found my way eventually to John Cass, which was a part-time college, part of, I think, London University now. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. I had great tutors and I could work, I think it was 2.5 or 3 days a week, and then I'd do temp work for the rest of the week. So I did a lot of clay modeling, a lot of figurative work from a live model. And I remember I put a dustbin by the side of me and I worked and I threw it away, and I worked and I threw it away. And looking back, I was running an apprenticeship for myself, really, of, if nothing else, just trying to learn how to look and to see. And I also did wood carving there, which I love. So I went off and got my tools from Tarantes that was still functioning then. And I was made a little lettering hammer by a really old man who made tools in London. And he had a little workshop at the back of his house. And I went to see him and he said, "You're going to be the last person that I make a little lettering hammer for, because I'm too old now." And he used to make tools for Epstein. I mean, it was extraordinary. And he made this hammer is so precious to me. If it was small enough, I'd keep it in my pocket, which I can't. Anyway, I eventually got to City and Guilds. I was encouraged by my tutors to go to City and Guilds. And suddenly I was with this, really serious makers. And it was wonderful. And I spent a little bit of time in the calligraphy department, which was upstairs at that time. And
was that with Berthold Volpe? Was he there?
No, I mean, this was a long time ago. I recently visited, and it was like, I said, "But there used to be a staircase there, and there used to be, it was a long time ago." And of course, there were architectural carvers there. And it triggered me into thinking, I really should learn stonemasonry. I think I want to get tighter and tighter. I don't want to do this loose. Well, anyway, I learned from there. I did a lot of figurative work there in clay until I realized actually that I'm a borrower, not a builder. So I like to take off rather than put on.
Brilliant.
And I found a little hut at the back of the yard and I hid in there and I carved, basically. And after the end of 2 years, I became pregnant and I left. So I left this absolutely wonderful, rich environment. But I went to Cornwall with the father of my children, and we were part of that wave of being self-sufficient. So we grew our own vegetables, and we had goats and chickens and ducks, and I had babies, basically. And I can remember making almost a ritual of putting my tools away, because I could see that I couldn't financially, and also with children, I couldn't hold the two together. So I put them away and I didn't carve for 20 years. And my partner was a potter. He trained in Japan in Mashiko, and he was setting up a kiln and he was making pots, and I was growing a huge veggie garden, and I met a lot of potters and makers through him, which was wonderful, but I wasn't making, so it had an edge to it. And I knew, and when I was generously invited into their workshops and their studios, it was like, oh, this is what I want to do. This is absolutely what I want to do. And it kept tapping away at me. But I also loved being a mum. And I loved all that, really. And we worked really, really hard to try and make it. And eventually we left there and we moved to Devon, mostly for the education of our children. And I trained to be a therapist. So I was a therapist for 15 years, working with body work mostly, And while I was in Cornwall, I booked in to see Barbara Hepworth, and very sadly, she died a few weeks before I was going to go and see her. And a few years later, when they were clearing up her estate, I had a phone call from one of her stonemasons, and he said, "I've just seen you. You were booked in to see Barbara, and would you like some of her tools?" And I had a baby in
Wow.
one arm and whatever, and I said, "No, no, no, don't give me her tools. I'm not working. Tools need to be
Oh my God.
give them to somebody who's
Rosie.
working." And do I regret it? Oh yes, I
Oh
do.
my God.
Oh yes, I do. And she
Oh
was like
my
a
God.
touchstone for me because she was a mother and she had children and she was a carver. And I especially love her very early work,
Yeah.
her smaller work. And it has
Mm.
a lovely intimacy about it. Anyway, so when I was in Devon, I did a little bit of calligraphy with a calligrapher called Peter Thornton. He made me realize that drawing letters is a really, really difficult thing to do. And I am very critical of myself. So I did some drawing of letters with him and realized that no way, however much I would like to, no way, unless I really focused in on it. And a few years ago, I also did some cutting of letters with Tom
Okay, yeah,
Perkins,
I know Tom.
a weekend with him, and I loved cutting them. But the drawing, because they're very specific, and I love working in that way. And if there's a slight wiggle, it's like they have really lettering has really informed my work. I can see it. Even though I'm not a letterer, it's something of that the boundaries and the very specific and I mean, they're beautiful. Letters are completely elegant. I love them. So it's sort of informed, it's sort of come underneath without me being aware that actually, especially with my lino cuts and my drawings, I'm actually forming letters. I'm using templates actually. I use the same templates that I sometimes use for my carving, so that it's sort of a bridge between my carving and my drawing, which I love. So anyway, lettering's been very, very important to me. So when I was in Devon and I was a therapist, I did at the end of that time a few carvings, which I did sort of perched on the steps up to my kitchen. And Bridget McCrum, who lived quite close to me in Devon and is a sculptor, offered me a little bit of polyphant stone. And for a few days I worked with her at her home. And it was like she just really encouraged me back. And she's always in my heart for that. It was really kind, and it was just the right moment for me to be beckoned back into carving. So for a while, I was a therapist and a carver at the same time. And of course, it was just inevitably it would fall in the middle and I wouldn't be able to do it. And then at the end of the time in Devon, I had a huge change in my life. My sons were going off to university or preparing to, and I left the house that I was in, and I had a new partner, and we moved eventually to a house on Dartmoor. And for the first time, I had a workshop. I had a barn right on the edge of the moor, opposite my house. Felt very supported financially as well as emotionally. And I just worked. I just worked and worked and worked because of all the years that I hadn't worked. It was like I was trying to catch up with myself. And I'd only just managed to catch this passion by its tail, really. 48, yes, I would have loved to have been carving when I was younger, but other things happened and I had other rich times. So no regret, really. And I started off working, I think, very good, sort of quite mythically and quite figuratively. And I think that was carried on through my work as a therapist, that I wanted somehow to make pieces that engaged with the emotional life of being a human being. So that's how I started. And one of the pieces that I did there in 2004, I was carving a stone boat, and the tsunami happened. And I realized immediately that what I wanted to put into the stone boat was a grandmother with her arms folded across her body, that she had left this life, but she was making the journey forward into wherever. And I offered it to Exeter Cathedral, and they said, yes, we'll have it for a few months. So it moved into Exeter Cathedral, and then this extraordinary thing happened where it just became nothing to do with me. So somebody, the vicar of Cartmel in Cumbria, saw it in Exeter and said, can we possibly borrow it for a while? And so it went up to him, and Hexham Abbey saw it and invited the piece into Hexham Abbey. I then convinced, I don't know, I convinced both Lincoln and Leicester cathedrals that it would be good to have it for a while, and they eventually said yes. And looking back, you know, they booked in installations years ahead, and I don't know how I fronted up, but I obviously did. I was better at it when I was younger. And then it had been seen by somebody from Canterbury, and she was then invited into Canterbury, and they put her in the crypt in the same place where Thomas à Becket's body was lain when the priests were watching his body, and they put candles either end of the piece. And it was just such a privilege. I mean, it's such a beautiful, beautiful space, as I'm sure you both know. And all sorts of things happened around that piece of sculpture. It was my first public piece, and it was wonderful. I just walked away from it and let other people do whatever they wanted to do around it. It's now in a public garden in Cotham Court in Warwickshire. That's where it landed at the end. Somebody saw it in Exeter, wanted to buy it, and I said, no, it's got to go on tour. Something's taken over. This isn't anything to do with me. I'm sorry, you can't have her. And they said, we'll wait for a year, which was really kind. So that was, and then after working more mythically, I started to work more roundedly because I was living on Dartmoor. So I looked out of my windows to a tor and to ancient granite, and it was extraordinary. And I worked with all sorts of stones. So I did work with marble quite a lot, but my personal opinion is that marble doesn't quite suit our landscape or our climate because it's longing for light. It's longing for that blast of strong sunlight that can play within the stone with its sort of slightly translucent. And so I tend to work with English stone that's used to drizzle and used to grey skies, and it sits much more comfortably. So I have worked with Portland. I won an exhibition to put some columns into a public garden in Devon, and they were about 6 foot each, and they were in Portland, and I decorated them. I was on crutches at the time, so I hobbled out, propped my crutches up against my workbench, and carved, because that's why I don't do public commissions, because actually I had a time limit, and I after that I said no more commissions because I get too anxious and I have been very privileged to be able to follow the ideas in my head. So I work with Purbeck Pond freestone from Landers, Portland from Albion Quarry, Polyphant from Cornwall, Ancaster, Kilkenny, but also Portuguese limestone, French cairn, Spanish and Italian alabaster, serpentine. I mean, I've worked with all sorts of stones, really. I've banned myself from carving Kilkenny anymore because it's really a bit too hard for me. And I am, at the moment, carving a lot of alabaster, which I'm really enjoying. I think it's because it's that translucency and the light flows through it. But I'm also at the moment carving a bit of Ancaster that I ordered in, because I usually go to a quarry and I search for lumps that will contain something that maybe I have an idea for. But I ordered this stone in, and at the moment a friend of mine who's a stonemason and a sculptor is using one of his big angle grinders to get a really awkward corner out of it. But mostly I work completely on my own. So I go from the beginning to the end by myself and find it really difficult to ask anybody to come into the process, because it's a journey and all sorts of things happen in that journey and my pieces change. And I do find when COVID was happening and lockdown was happening, I started to work with clay again in my bedroom. And then I had to go to a foundry and they were delightful, but I found it really difficult to look at the piece when it was finished. If there was something wrong with it, I almost averted my eyes because I couldn't say I'm much too nice, and I couldn't say, actually, could you change this or change that? And it was a process that was out of my hands, and I found it really difficult. But I also, my drawings have come out of that COVID time because I had this, like I think a lot of children do, I had this feeling that I couldn't draw. So using the templates and making that bridge between my stone carving and my drawing just opened me up to the fact that I actually can. And the forms and shapes that I'm sort of almost three-dimensionally doing on a sheet of paper. I absolutely love. It's completely meditative. I completely sink into it. I have a cup of tea. I work in my bedroom on my desk. There's no stone dust. I don't wear goggles. I'm not wearing breathing apparatus. And it's just a delight. And it's like time off from being in my workshop. And my workshop's on the outskirts of Bristol, because I can't work here because of dust and noise. And I rent it, which is hard because it's quite a high rent, but it's a very light studio, and that's where I work. And these days, having moved to Bristol, I think I'm very affected by landscape. So moving to Bristol, of course, I lost the Dartmoor landscape, and my work has become much more architectural, and it's become much more angular, and I have to be really precise, because a bit, I guess, like lettering, if something draws your eye away from the piece because something just doesn't flow quite right, and that's what I feel about my pieces now, and I love it. I love that precision, and I am hugely critical of my craftsmanship, because I think craftsmanship, I was trained to be really good at the craft that I was doing. And I've come out of a different era, really, and that was really important, and that stays with me. So I would use hand tools. I don't use a compressor. I think mostly because when I was a therapist and doing body work, I did a lot of energy work, and the vibration of the compressor, it just doesn't work for me. And I do use machine tools. I use, the usual ones. I use angle grinders and polishers, Dremels, big Dremels, small Dremels, but I use them reluctantly, because actually I'm really happiest with hammer and chisel and rasps and abrasive. And it feels like my hand is closer to my work. There's nothing that stands between. And when I worked with people and when I trained as a physio, a lot of that work was hands-on, and it feels like I trust my hand. So my work is quite slow. And as I've got older, because I'm only a few years off 80, and as I've got older, I'm becoming slower, and I'm finding it really frustrating. But I have promised myself that as long as I can do it, that even if I can work 2 or 3 pieces a year, that's enough, that's sufficient. And throughout all this time, right at the beginning, I worked really hard to find people who would want my work. So I was applying for exhibitions and trying to get my work out into galleries. I decided that I wouldn't approach London galleries because it felt important to me, and I'm not sure that they've accepted my work anyway, but it felt important to me to have a relationship with the person that was going to sell my work or show my work. And mostly I've really managed that. And I've worked very hard with my relationships with galleries. And the galleries I have now have been really faithful to my work. I am part of RSS, so I'm part of the Royal Society of Sculptors. And during COVID, they arranged for regional Zooms, which were wonderful, because it meant that I was part of the Southwest group, and we could talk about how it was for us that we couldn't get to work, and what we were doing, and it was hugely supportive. And out of that, in 2022, we had a group exhibition in Chichester Cathedral, and I put in some little bronzes that had been made out of my clay that I'd made during COVID, and I put in some small alabaster pieces, and I called them totems for sanctuary. And those pieces, I have no idea where they came from. Sometimes my ideas come when I'm looking in a different direction, and they sneak in. And I think they've come out of years and years and years of looking at ancient artifacts. So one of the places, British Museum, the V&A, Pitt Rivers in Oxford, I think all that information has come into me, and sometimes it pops up in a different way. And there are other times when I do want to look, and I go out looking for ideas, and they come into my work, like my totems for sanctuary. I'd been to a museum in London of Egyptian artifacts that were brought back, and there were some most exquisite handles in there, carved wood, and my totems of sanctuary I know came from something of that, because they were just beautiful and the craftsmanship was extraordinary. So I'm not somebody that just starts on a lump of stone and sees where it goes. I do an immense amount of work before I even touch the stone. So I have stones in my workshop that I'll walk around, sometimes for years, and then I will doodle on every available bit of paper and do rough drawings and then make a maquette in plasticine. And that maquette then lines up with the stone. I'm sure you're both familiar with this. Lines up with the stone. I see if it will fit in. I see if it's the right bit of stone. And then I draw on the stone, and will draw continuously as I carve. And these days, with my more angular pieces, I use templates. So I will mess around with bits of cardboard for ages, with a pair of scissors, cutting it, shaping it, throwing it, starting again. And then the template will be placed on the stone, and I'll draw around it, and then I'll carve. So I'm not an intuitive carver. There's a lot of work that goes on before I do that. So I've said that I usually go to quarries to look for stone. And I go to McMarmalade, which is outside McMarmalade Stone Yard, which is outside Marlborough. I obviously go to Landers. I've been to Albion to get the Portland stone that I needed. Wells Cathedral Yard in Cheddar I will go to. And I will wander around looking. And being a woman, a quarry situation isn't the easiest situation. They're still they're male worlds, aren't they?
We know all about the male
So I
world.
take a very, very deep breath and I front up, basically, and I hope to be taken seriously. And I have to say, I've also been met with incredible helpfulness and kindness in these places, but I don't find them easy to enter. And of course, I'm an older woman. And that is also something that I have to be with, because I have to somehow convince even more strongly that I know what I'm doing. I'm not retired. I'm still working as much as I can, and that I am making sense. And it's a hard one. I'm not invisible. Everything that women talk about getting older, becoming invisible, and you're almost thrown into a category. So I have to work very, very hard to say, no, this is me. I'm who I am, and I'm here, and my head's okay, and I know what I
Do you
want.
ever work with slate, Rosie?
I have worked with slate. I've made a big mandala, which is halfway down my staircase. I loved it. I loved it. It was because I used some of my wood carving tools, and I could decorate, and I loved it. And it's interesting you ask, because I am thinking of going to get some lumps of slate.
When you say lump,
think
Rosie, are you, when you say lump, do you mean? I mean, I didn't even know you could get lumps of slate. I knew. So, what kind of thicknesses are you thinking you'll get?
Well, I've seen someone exhibiting some slate that they worked on. I loved his pieces. I was really taken by it because he was on form, and I'd been showing at On Form. I think I showed for 2 years at On Form. It's a wonderful exhibition, really supportive of stone carvers, and they had people looking at work who were not just interested in stone, but also interested in buying, and it was really reaffirming. But the slate that he had worked was probably about my hand deep,
Right.
and he'd worked them beautifully. It had a real presence. That's why I work with stone. I find stone is the most beautiful material. It's ancient. It has an extraordinary presence, and it has a stillness. When I work my pieces, that's what I'm really trying to be with. I'm trying to make a relationship with the stone, that I don't in any way force it or waste it. And I do push my pieces in, and sometimes I push them further than the stone will really allow me to. But I take risks. That quality of stillness is something that I don't think I would have worked with any other material. It's something that keeps me with stone, and always will keep me with stone, however hard it is and however challenging it is to carve, because it is, isn't it? Yeah.
I was thinking about words to describe your work, and I find it really difficult to find a word other than a description of the shapes. And actually, stillness is perfect, because that's how it makes you feel. It allows, they're very personally, their object you can be quiet with. They're very, you can allow your eye to go beyond them, and they don't challenge your comprehension. They actually put you in a place of peace. And I think stillness is a fantastic descriptive word of them. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you, both of you, because I think that's where I sit most comfortably. It is that quality that I'm searching for. I'm really inviting people to just take a bit of space out of their lives because the world is in a pretty difficult place. And I don't make work that's going to challenge in that way. I make work that hopefully holds a space for somebody. And I think one of the reasons I find it very difficult to talk about my work is that I don't really want to. I want to put my work out and I want to let it take its own journey. And it's what reflects for people, what people see in it, are drawn to it, or just walk past it because they're not drawn to it. But I don't want to put words on the wall saying, why I'm doing it and what it's for, and because it has its own presence. And I think that's enough
That's
for me.
so good to hear.
Well, I bought a pamphlet from the Henry Moore Institute recently, and in the pamphlet they put a bookmark, and they sent it to me, and on the bookmark it said, "Contemplation is a radical act."
I
think it was like a radical act of rebellion or something like that. Quiet contemplation is a radical act of rebellion, and in fact, the pamphlet got put on my bookcase, but the bookmark got put up on the wall of the workshop. And when life gets a bit too demanding, I suppose the word is, I look at the bookmark and I just think every day contemplation, every single day.
Yeah, it is.
I think I'm with you, Rosie. I think until very, very recently, everything I've done is commission. And Charlotte's exactly the same. But I find it, there is such an edge of anxiety around commissioned work, that those moments of quiet stillness become less and less because you are caught up with people's expectations, your own expectations of your own ability, making mistakes, time, getting things done per day, getting this kind of like tick sheet of things done on a timetable. And you almost have to physically acknowledge I've just had a moment of complete stillness. You have to kind of like take a step back and go, what a wonderful hour, what a lovely, free, wonderful hour. And I think when you produce work through, I guess, play or work that sits more personally for you, that maybe that will sit in the workshop and develop, those pieces become more and more precious, don't they? And I think I completely and utterly empathize with what you were saying about that personal decision to stop doing commissioning.
Yeah. Thank you. On the other hand, being a freelancer, if you like, has its problems as well.
Yes.
When I talked about, getting in touch with galleries and, especially when I first started, I remember going to Peter Randall Page, because I was on the same moor as him, and saying, how do I get out there? And he said, just keep putting your work out, get your name known. People will start to recognize your work. And that was really good advice. But it was tough, and it still is tough. I've had years of lugging out heavy oak plinths and my work into various gardens, galleries, whatever. I've never known whether I'm going to sell or not. I often lug them back again. Last year, out of the blue, gallery in the Cotswolds saw my work and worked really hard for me. It was the first time, really. I do have really loyal galleries, but this gallery gave me an exhibition. It took me up to the London Art Fair, the British Art Fair, my work, and I suddenly felt this really strong hand behind my back. And that was a really new experience, because although I have galleries, it's always felt very uncertain whether they'd want a piece of my work. Unfortunately, that gallery has changed their mode of working, and they have given up their gallery and they're working in a different way. So I'm still looking for somebody who will say, actually, we'll sell your work, you can just make. Because I think I'm at that point. I've had enough years of trying to put my work out, marketing my work, writing up all sorts of words about my work for various galleries, and all I want to do now is work. Time is precious, really, really precious. And I just want to be in my workshop making. So keep your fingers crossed. I don't know whether it will happen, but and I've had injuries too. I've been in a wheelchair twice in my life. Once when I fell off a workbench, just not a good story. And I was balancing on another workbench because I was trying to reach the top of a piece of stone to finish the carving on it, and it tipped off, and I put weight on one leg for quite a few months. So I was wheelchair, crutches, and a few years ago I broke my Achilles tendon, so I again wheelchair, crutches. So I don't take any day that I go to my workshop or any day that I walk along the street, I don't take it for granted anymore, because I know what it's like not to be able to do it.
That's extraordinary. I think even having a strained wrist or an achy elbow can impact your day. A piece of grit in your eye impacts your day, doesn't it? And, you know, it's such a physical, all-encompassing dance every single day, isn't it?
Absolutely.
A headache. For me, hormonal swings.
Headache.
I do remember those.
Hormonal swings can make me swing in a very erratic way.
Anyway, yes, I mean, I think we all need to say thank you to our bodies quite a lot. You know, thank you for allowing me to do this. Thank you for me. I do have slight arthritis in my hands, but they're doing really well. So I put my arms in the air every morning and say thank you.
You do exercises, you know, because with your physio background, you do anything to keep you mobile or...
I've done a sort of qigong and yoga and whatever in the past. I do know my body in the sense that I did a lot of anatomy and physiology and a little bit of dissection, I have to say, when I was training. Do I do exercises? No, I'm usually knackered, actually. the time I come back from my workshop, but I walk in Bristol. I walk much more than I did on Dartmoor. So I'm probably walking about 24 miles a week to get to places. It's so easy in a city, strangely enough.
Rosie, can I ask you, because I'm a bit of a workshop fanatic, in your workshop, you said yourself you work on your own, and I've seen some of the scale of the work that you've worked on in the past, etc. What kind of things have you got in place that allow you to move things or turn things? Have you got specific things that have been very helpful to you? I know I've got like a pump up pallet truck that's in use nearly all the time as an up and down banker and moving around. But I wonder if you've got anything, what do you use and how do you do it? How do you do it?
Okay, lovely practical question.
Yeah, no,
well,
sorry.
My workshop is in a complex of workshops, but I'm probably they're all doing different things. I'm probably the only artist there. So in a sense, I'm Miss Colleague at my workshop. It's about the size of a double garage. It's got, it's bitterly cold in winter because it's open slat and big doors that I can open in the front. And in the summer, it's really hot because it's got a metal roof, but it's very light. It's very light. I have a gantry, which I bought a few years ago when I moved actually to this complex of studios, because I'm not good at asking for help. I just am absolutely hopeless at it. And I knew that I was stuck. In Devon, I knew a lot of people that I could ask. I had two guys down the road who were fantastic stern movers for me, and I could just phone up and say, hey, could you just, it's just too heavy for me. Could you just, lug it to here or whatever? And in Bristol, I didn't have those connections at all. So the gantry is wonderful. So I have obviously straps and I have quite a lot of stone huddled in the middle, and I can lift it by myself. Otherwise, as I say, I've got various old work. I've got an old kennel that I use as a workbench because it's turned upside down, and I have a wonderful workbench on wheels. So if I'm wanting to move stone from my transit van into my workshop, I can wheel it out onto the gravel, which is a bit bumpy, and then I can either haul it out with straps, or I've got a pole, and I can pole it out. And I put old pillows down on the ground, and I tip the stone out, and then I edge it towards a strap so that the gantry can then get hold of it and can lift it up onto my workbench.
I love it. Charlotte would say gantry is a girl's best friend.
Oh my God.
Every girl's
dream. The first thing she said to me when I visited her beautiful workshop was like, look at this. And she literally got a duster out and like rubbed just lovingly the arm of her gantry.
She's making it up. She's making it
up.
up.
No,
duster.
Absolutely.
A duster.
Well, it was an old t-shirt. Yes.
As a lover of gantries, you must come and visit mine. I have spectacular spiders in my workshop. I mean, absolutely spectacular. So I have these huge cobwebs, which are covered in stone dust, hanging over me, which I do occasionally clear out, and all the spiders, big and little, all scuttle away. But no, my gantry is it my best friend? No, my little lettering hammer.
Jealous of the lettering
hammer. My gantry comes quite close after that.
I've got a question for you. Have you you done any teaching? Have you had people through your workshop or?
Yes, I taught really informally to some local people for a while. And that was lovely, actually. And one of the reasons I'm not very good at talking about myself is that I'm a much better listener and a much better enabler of other people. So I did enjoy that little bit of teaching. But I suppose because I've come really late to the serious carving, it feels like every moment is precious. And eventually I said, actually, I need my workshop
It's a
back.
big thing sharing your workshop, isn't it?
I think I would add that I got into teaching really young, in my 20s, through having a fine arts degree and not knowing what to do to pay the rent, and ended up going to what is now the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, used to be Bretton Hall, and I went there and did a PGCE, and surrounded by the most exquisite sculpture. And I think it was easy. I'm not going to say it was easy. It was not easy in one sense, but teaching because you need to can become a real trap. And I think I've got definitely into my 50s, late 50s, and I have had an epiphany that time is really, really precious. And I've made some very difficult decisions in the last 2 years to financially lose my entire income through that process. But also the unfortunate thing one way is I am a much better teacher now because I've got all that life behind me and all of that experience. But at the same time, I feel like this is the time to be serious, like you're saying, that it's a real trap for younger makers sometimes. I think that what I'm trying to say is if you start teaching and it takes over your life in your 30s and 40s, like you, I'm quite jealous of the fact that I can't get those years back where I could have been seriously making and be in a different situation. Now, I had to teach financially. I had to do that. I had no other way of making a living at that time because I was so invested in it. But I totally understand what you mean about getting your workshop back and what have you. And I think I would say to anybody who's got to that point, because what I see now is ex-students advertising stone carving courses left, right and centre because it is a good monthly income, but at the same time to try and not lose the hunger for the making and the promotion and the getting your work out there. That's the balance, isn't it? And I think, you'll find... Sorry, go on. I was thinking what you've said has made me reflect about how I feel about studio spaces and making and the sense of urgency when you get older. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I saw that with my tutors, who were good sculptors, but they were pouring their energy into us.
Exactly that. That's exactly it.
And I couldn't see how they had any energy left for their own work.
That's so well put. Yeah.
And
Pouring out your energy. Yeah.
Beautifully put.
And of course, they were phenomenal teachers, and I'm really grateful to them. But I was so aware of their process and what was happening. And, I feel I've only just begun. I think I've only just started to carve. And as I've said before, time is precious. I have so much that I want to do. I have so many pieces that I want to work, and I will do my best. My hope is that I will keel over with my boots on. and in quite a few years' time, so that I can actually do some of the pieces that I've got stored up I want to make.
Well, I hope you're not balanced on several stacked workbenches at the time.
Don't. Really stupid. It was really stupid stuff. There's a whole story about that which I won't go into. But no, don't balance on workbenches and go and muck your leg up for months. Not worth it.
I love the fact that you just thought, yes, I'm just going to pop that workbench on there and then I'm going to climb on top of it and it will be absolutely fine. Blind faith, Rosie, is what I've taken away from that story. Not the fact that it was possibly a bit daft, but I think we go back to the beginning of the story, and your absolute faith that you could do it is what I'm taking away from that. That's what we're taking away from it.
Well, with the balancing of workbenches, I actually, thank goodness, my partner was in the house, and my barn was probably about 40 or 50 paces from the house, and I had to crawl on my stomach because I couldn't walk, because I knew that I'd either broken my leg, I actually fractured my knee, and I had to crawl on my hands and legs, and I managed to get through the kitchen door, and I said, "Help!" He rushed me off to hospital.
Oh, well, can I ask you why I know, was it Bristol? Because Charlotte's got a connection to Bristol. Bristol is a fascinating place, isn't it? It's a centre of art excellence. I think that's my opinion of Bristol for all those people who live in Bristol or from Bristol. Charlotte, you feel like that too. I remember speaking to Charlotte's partner Owen, and he said it was such an extraordinary place
We've
to
got
visit.
good friends in Bristol, so we go there regularly, and we got married at the registry office in Bristol.
Oh,
That's why
well,
we
come and
like
see
it.
me.
I think we need to plan a trip, Rosie, to be honest. I
I'd
want to come and
love
see your
to.
workshop.
And yes, Bristol's got a lot of very young energy. It's really good. I see it being really good for graphic, film, illustration. Really difficult to get places to work here. Really difficult for me as a stone carver being mucky to find somewhere that would be okay for me to work. But that's another whole conversation, isn't it, about how people find a place for them. And I also agree that entering somebody's workshop or studio it's an act of generosity that you're invited in, because I think they are intimate spaces, and I think we reveal a lot of ourselves within them.
I'm terrified what that actually says about the inside of my mind with mine, actually. I had an idea it might mean that it's chaotic, but it's a lot more going on because it's trying to hide the inertia that sits behind it. I think that's what's happening. What are you working towards at the moment, Rosie? Is there an exhibition? Is it a collection? Is it you're making work for just pleasure at this moment with the hope it will go somewhere else? Or have you got something?
A bit of that. Since last year, when a gallery really worked very hard. This year I decided I'd just make, because of course they've changed their tack. And my habit is to make the year before for exhibitions the year after. So I'm making, not really knowing where it's going to go. And there's a wonderful quote which I have here, which was I think it was Phila de Barlow who said, "There is a loneliness and sadness in making without a destination." And in many ways I'm used to that, because and that's one of the advantages of accepting commissions, is that you do have a destination. And often I'm working without a destination, but with the hope that it will go somewhere. So yes, this year I'm hoping that my work will go somewhere next year. And actually, I'm also finding it quite difficult to let go of work.
Is that a change? Is that a change? Do you
No,
think?
there have been times when I put work out to exhibition and I've really wanted to take it away. And it may be because I put it into a different environment, and I am super critical about my work, and maybe I just want to hide it, but also maybe it just feels like a bit revealing. And it has got worse. And I'm looking, I've got a lot of pieces in the sitting room downstairs, and it's like they're my family.
I totally understand that. I can totally, I'm with you. I'm with you.
And I'm really, and I'm thinking, I can't actually say to myself, I'm going to be making 8 or 9 pieces next year. I'm at a different place with myself. And it's like, I can't let them go. So there's a very different dynamic going on, but I always have found it hard to reveal, I think, to reveal my work.
Do you think there's stones in your pocket? Do you think they're modern day stones that you've picked up?
Oh, I've always got stones in my pocket.
I wonder whether those ones in your front room they are in a virtual pocket, aren't they? I think they're held within your inner self. They're kind of protected and loved, aren't they? Stones in your pocket.
Stones in your pocket. And of course they've witnessed so much of my life. They're witnesses to all different phases of my life. And if they go, they're like an archive.
I love the fact that there's lots of scientific proof that stones absorb energy and they are changed by us. And so to let those go, you're letting more than a physical sense of you go. You're letting that emotional time with that object has absorbed all that, and that's so difficult, because that then becomes memory, and witnessing and memory, it's a very, very powerful thing, isn't it? As you get a little bit older and things become more precious, memories, emotions become more heightened, memories become more precious.
And I do think stones absorb. I absolutely agree with you. And they've had dinosaur feet walking.
I know. Yes.
And they've been witnesses
Witnesses.
all these millions of years.
Oh, Love it. Well, I can't say. I mean, I'm moved actually, Rosie. So much of what you've said has resonated with me, and I can feel it. I can feel it. What you've said has made a difference to me. So it's just been wonderful to talk to you and listen to, you say it's very difficult for you to talk about your work, but I have to say it's extraordinary, and you do it so. I know you said it wasn't effortless, but my God, it's wonderful.
I would say it's been
Joyful,
joyful, uplifting.
I would say so. And it makes me want to get on a train to Bristol, to be honest.
Yeah.
Oh, do it.
And then I'm like, we need to have a show. We need to have an exhibition, don't we? We need to have a show of witnesses. We need to have some witnesses put in a show, don't we?
What a lovely idea.
I think we do.
And
Charlotte.
thank you, both of you, because it's actually made me think back through. It's been an extraordinary process for me of remembering and being able to talk through it. However difficult it's been an extraordinary experience. So thank you. And you've made it very easy, the two of you. I find it very easy to talk to both of you.
That's so lovely. Thank you. And actually, coming from a trained therapist, I'm slightly worried that Charlotte and I have both been manipulated by your super duper. Yes. Oh, thumbs up. Oh, okay. Yes. You've made us feel very comfortable, but you're the pro, actually. So I'm going to take it.
Thank you. I'll hear that one. Thank you.
Oh man, I could go on and on and on, but I'm going to go to the workshop. Rosie, you're going to the workshop. Charlotte, you're practically in the workshop. So thank you so much, Rosie Musgrave. If people want to find you, and if there's a gallery out there wants to basically pay your workshop rent, pay you lots of money and sell your work, how do they find you? I
have a website, rosiemusgrave.com. I'm on Instagram, Rosie Musgrave Sculpture, and I'd be delighted. Have a look into me.
Yes. Everybody should be looking into you because your work is extraordinary.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know about you, but yeah, like I said on the interview, I want to go down to Bristol and see what's going on down there. What about you?
Me too. I just found it astonishing looking at her work, thinking that she didn't start carving properly full time till she was 48.
Yeah.
And what she's achieved since then, and just that drive and determination. I mean, she said she was not far off 80 now.
I know. I think it's really interesting because we are lucky enough to interview many different sculptors and masons and carvers who are at all various points of their careers and their journeys. And I think this was a very poignant and special one for me because of Rosie's age and her kind of journey into it. And I found it really interesting that you and I have just had a brief conversation about the fact that it's still a struggle to sell your work. It's still you still have to plan and try and push your work out there as a freelance sculptor, even at that age. And I think her enthusiasm and joyfulness about the whole thing was a real affirmation of what we do.
Her passion came through really strongly. The passion for the work and that drive that I think so many of us recognize, but we're not all as disciplined as acting. I think what really came across for me was her understanding that there was a limited amount of time to get the work done for her.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're all the same, but she is in a position where she's understanding it more than we are.
In a real sense.
A real sense. And I felt that was really enlightening when you're wasting time scrolling on your phone, you could be making stuff.
Yeah. Good.
And I thought that was a wake-up call, actually, to, remind ourselves that we've only got so much time we can make. And
I love the fact when she said, every time I walk, I'm able to walk to the workshop, and I never take being healthy for granted.
Yeah.
Not being in pain or not, all of that stuff, never take that for granted.
And that's a big thing for us who work with a very physical medium. Our physical abilities dictate our capabilities with material.
I also like the idea that she excludes some stones now because she's like, they're too hard on my body or what have you. And then she adjusts her visual interpretation of form, etc., into a material that she knows that she can work. And I think that's, for the future, I think I'd like a conversation with everybody about gender disparity and material choices, and that kind of machismo element of hard stones and heavy hammers. I'd really like a conversation about that, because, you know, beauty is not, it's not what's the word, it doesn't have to be massive to be beautiful, and it doesn't have to be a hard material to be clever or skillful. So I'd really, that's something for me to think about. Maybe we'll have a chat later in another podcast.
I thought it was a fascinating insight into a lifetime of learning and work and understanding when it's your moment to move forward as well.
Yeah, brilliant.
I love that bit early on where she said she had the wisdom to know it wasn't for her when she was training as a physio.
To walk away.
To walk away. You very rarely hear things phrased like that.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a really good, there were so many things I took from that. So there was so much wisdom in there, wasn't there?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
And very delivered in a very humble way, I thought, as well. Loved the story. Two stories that of course stood out was the man who made Epstein's tools, made her hammer, turning down Barbara Hepworth's chisels, and her description of city and guilds, I assume in the 60s or 70s, being, tucking yourself away, which is sort of my memory of how it was when I went there for the first time.
Yeah, it was for me. I started in 98.
Yeah, it was still like that then, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Not so much now, not like that anymore. It's kind of changed its image, but fascinating. Okay, so I have a top tip. Anybody who is on Facebook might have seen, because I think I shared it. A friend of mine, John Maloney, who is a master mason, he posted about a book called Descriptive Geometry for Architects and Builders by Leslie A. Lee and R. Fraser Reiki, which is a textbook really for, it is what it says in the title, Architects and Builders, of maths that helps you make things. So it's got arches, it's got moldings, it's got, stress points, etc. Little mathematical formula that helps you work out bulk and size and volume and weight and jointing. If there's anybody out there who's interested in that kind of thing, if there's any students of the masonry world out there, I found as a learner, I was pushed towards Purchase and Warland as the two kind of mathematical Bibles for practical masonry. And they are to an extent. But if you've worked through Warland in particular, and if you're working something like a volute or like an ionic cap, or any capitals that need kind of retreating, spirals, or if you're doing a ramp and twist, etc., which is all still, I believe, part of the curriculum, they can feel like there are bits of information missing. And that's because the books assume you have a level of understanding up to the point you pick that book up. And that's not necessarily true anymore. So I was really thrilled when John drew my attention to this book, because when I opened it up, it's written so simply and so practically. And at the moment I'm doing some designing for a semicircular arch, and I was really wondering about the joints and how far the joints, if there's any room for wiggling the joints about. And this little book has been really, really helpful. So that's my top tip today. When he posted it on Facebook, I went straight on eBay and I managed to buy a copy for £8. And Charlotte, I believe you did the same thing.
Yeah, I think mine was about £8 or £9. We'll put a link. We'll put the details of the book in the show notes, and people can go and have a look. If they're interested. So really well, if you're interested and you are studying these subjects, or you're looking for setting out, and it's got a brilliant little section on mouldings, which is always brilliantly helpful, especially if you're replacing carvings that have mouldings that run through them, or whether you're doing masonry. I would strongly recommend them. So that's my top tip for this week. A great top tip. I love a book top tip, actually.
Love a book. And
you should go out and buy it.
Immediately without even thinking. I want to thank John Maloney. A big shout out to him.
Yeah, thank you, John.
John and I trained together in 2000 at the Building Crafts College in Warren Street, or Titchfield Street as it was, and he's gone on to do great things. So it's a real joy to train with John. Thanks for the book, John.
Well, I think that's everything for this month.
I think so.
Happy chipping.
Happy chipping, everybody.